So have you ever had one of those days? You get up in the morning and you stub your toe on the end of the bed. And you make your way to the kitchen and you click on the light and you go to start making coffee in the and then and it gets worse. You go and you put on your favorite pants and the zipper gets stuck. And you're thinking, I'm going to have to leave enough time to stop and get coffee, and you put your shoe on, and you go to tie it, and it breaks. And you go to get in the car, and you have a flat tire. And you take the time to change the tire, and I'm not going to get coffee today, and then your car won't start. Right? Okay, maybe, hopefully, no one has ever had that bad of a day, right? All of those things at once. But I am sure each of us have had a kind of bad day, where one or maybe more of those things happen to us, and you're thinking, man, can it get any worse? And some of us may have had not just a day like that, but maybe a whole week like that, or a month like that, or you feel like you had a year like that, where things just seem to go wrong all the time. Well, today we're going to be looking at a few weeks and months in Pharaoh's life with Moses and Aaron. But we wonder, can it get any worse? So we're picking up back in Exodus. Last week we left off with Moses realizing that he had a job to do. God had a purpose for him. And remember that God, when he calls you, he equips you. And nothing that you have done would ever disqualify you from God using you. And so Moses is learning that. He tried to make excuses, and God's like, nope, nope, nope. And he's like, okay, you don't talk very well, then Aaron speaks fine, we'll use him too. And he puts it together, and Moses can't get out of it, and meets up with Aaron, and he's like, we have to go back. We're going to go back to Egypt. God's going to use us to bring these people out. And Moses said, I'm kind of like the prophet. God's going to speak to me, and I'm going to tell you what to say, and you're going to say it. And so they get back to Egypt, they call all the Israelites together, and they tell them what to do. And they believe it. Because that was one of his, what if they don't believe me? And he did the signs that they showed, and the staff on the ground, and it turned into a snake, and doing all these things. And so they get back, and they go to Pharaoh. And they say, we want you to allow the Israelites to go into the desert to worship and sacrifice to our God. He has done great things for us. We want to go and worship and sacrifice to our God. And Pharaoh's like, I don't know your God. I don't care about your God. I'm not going to let you go. You are my workers. You are my workforce. Why would I lose 3 days of workers? He's like, that's a hard no. And so Pharaoh's now annoyed that they want to leave. And he goes to his overseers and the slave drivers of the Israelites, and he says, okay, guys, these Israelites that you oversee, they still need to make all the bricks. They need to make all the bricks that you ask them to make their daily quota. They still have to do that. But you don't give them any straw. Now, straw was a very important ingredient in making bricks for them. And so, have you ever been asked to do a job where you don't get all the pieces to do the job well? And so now the Israelites have to go out and find the rubble and the straw, bring it with them to their workplace, and still make as many bricks as they've always had to make before. That's impossible. It's impossible to have to go find all of this stuff and then come and do the work and still meet the daily quota. They can't do it. And so the overseers and the slave drivers are being very difficult with them and beating them and making their lives even more horrible than before. And Moses goes back to God and he's like, God, why have you brought all this trouble on these people? Why did you send me to do this for them? And now Pharaoh's not letting them go, and he's making it worse for them, and you're not helping them. But God reassured Moses that he would indeed bring his people out of Egypt. It was just a longer process than going and saying, hey, Moses, do this, and Pharaoh let it happen. And so now as I like to look at it, it's just stuff, right? So God sends Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh, and he says, the guys say to Pharaoh, let us go. And Pharaoh's like, or maybe do a miracle. And so Aaron does the staff trick, right? He throws the staff on the ground and God turns it into a snake. But the problem was Pharaoh also had what the Bible calls wise men and sorcerers around him. And they do the same thing. They all throw their staffs on the floor and they become snakes too. Now the only difference was that Aaron's snake, and the staff that he threw down, swallowed up all the other guys' snakes. So there was only one staff left to pick up. But that wasn't enough. That didn't prove anything to Pharaoh. He said, my guys can do it. There's no God in this. So they leave, and God sends them back to Pharaoh. He's going to the river one day. And they go into the river, and they said, let our people go. And Pharaoh's like, I don't think so, but maybe another miracle. What else would you do? And so they go and they turn all of the water in Egypt to blood. All the water in the Nile, as if all the water in all the tributaries everywhere that comes in Egypt turns to blood. Now, not that I've ever done this test, but I just know, because I trust science, that fish can't live in blood, they can only live in water, right? And so what does that mean if all the water is turned to blood? Well, all the fish die. And so all the fish come to the top and go off to the side. And so you can imagine the smell that's happening along the Nile and in Egypt at the time. But the problem was, they were like, well, that's nice. But these sorcerers, they did the same thing. They could turn water into blood as well. So he's like, you're not going anywhere. It can't get much worse. 7 days later, God sends Moses and Aaron back to Pharaoh. And they said, let our people go. And Pharaoh's like, I don't think so. Once again, I'm not losing my word. And so they're like, well, if you don't let us go, God's going to send some frogs. And he's like, what are some frogs, right? Like, I was on a mission trip in the Bahamas. You have to watch with me in the bathroom, in the shower, they get walked down on you, whatever. It's just frogs, right? So God starts sending the frogs because Pharaoh says no. It wasn't just 5 or 6 frogs. It wasn't just 10 or 20 frogs. There were frogs everywhere. And not just outside, but in everybody's homes, in the palace, in the bedrooms, every single area of Egypt was covered. But again, Pharaoh's sorcerers could summon frogs as well, and so Pharaoh's like, no big deal. But then there got to be a lot, because they refused, and more frogs happened. And Pharaoh's like, okay, guys. Tells Moses and Aaron, and he's like, okay, the frogs get a little overwhelming, you can make them stop. And if you make them stop at all, you can do it. And so Moses says, I'll pray. And when he prayed, of course, God listened, and the frogs, they don't disappear. They die. So now they have dead fish on the riverbanks and piles of dead frogs on their own. So Egypt's smelling fantastic right now, I'm sure. And but they're like, it can't get much worse. I was just kidding, you guys are throwing it in there. So Moses and Aaron come back. And God tells Aaron, take your staff and stir up the dust. And he stirs up the dust, and what comes? All the dust from those nuts. And there are gnats everywhere. Like I said, I can handle frog, but I don't like flies. And Pharaoh's looking at his sorcerers going, okay, guys, there's nothing to this, right? But they can't summon gnats. And so some of them are thinking, okay, this isn't just sorcery and magic. There's something to these things that these two guys do. Maybe there is this God person they're talking about. And Pharaoh's thinking, I can't get my first milk. And so they meet down at the river again. And Moses and Aaron say, let our people go. And if you don't let us go, try to do this. Except in Goshen. If you remember, Goshen is where all the Israelites were living. And since flies can be so debilitating and devastating to crops and things like that, God sends in the flies. Because Pharaoh says no. And swarms and swarms and swarms of flies come, and they cover everything. They cover the palace walls and the ground, and they begin to ruin the crops of Egypt. But there's not a fly to be found in the field. And so Pharaoh kind of notices this, and he's looking around and brings Moses and Aaron back and says, okay. Make the flag go away, and you can worship right here. You can do your sacrifice with God right here, right? That would be fine. And Moses and Aaron are like, that's not how it works. You have to let us go, because the sacrificing we do and the worship we do will definitely offend you Egyptians, and they might kill us. We don't want to risk our lives for something that you give us permission to do. We need to go out in the desert and do it. And so Pharaoh's like, okay, this can make the flies go. And so the flies go. But again, Pharaoh, not a man of his word, does not keep up his end of the bargain. He said that it can't work, right? So when Moses and Aaron realize that he's not letting the people go, they go back and say, okay, if this is how you're going to play, it's the livestock. God's going to send a plague. And then the next day, a plague comes on the livestock, and all the birds die. But not one animal in Goshen is touched. And Pharaoh's like, I can't get my foot. His heart is still hurting. Nothing. And so next up are the boils. And the boils affect any animal that's left and every person in Egypt. And yet Pharaoh still won't let them go. And it get worse? It sure can, because now comes the king. And they again go to Pharaoh and let our people go. And again he says no. And then Moses gives a warning to the people. If you have animals and slaves outside looking into shelter, and some are starting to see the idea that what they mean is true, and there might be some God in all of this, and so they listen and they bring in their livestock and slaves. But folks at Pharaoh are like, there's nothing to this, whatever, and they don't listen because their hearts are hardened and they're not seeing God in any of this. And Moses raises his staff to heaven, and the hail starts to come down and pummel anything and everything that is on the ground. And the thunder and the lightning come, causing destruction throughout all of Egypt, but not Goshen. It's like Eeyore's rain cloud over Egypt, right? It's just dumping right on them. And it is devastating everything. All the crops, everything. It's flattening everything. And so Pharaoh sees the destruction, and he calls Aaron and Moses and says, make it stop and I'll let you go, okay? I've had enough. And so Moses says, as soon as we leave the city, it will stop. And as soon as they left the city, it stopped. And of course, that's all Pharaoh cared about, is that the plague would stop. And as it stopped, he's like, I'm not letting it go. So we've had all the water turn to blood, we've had the frogs, the gnats, the flies, the livestock dying, boils, and hail. And it gets worse. Aaron and Moses go back to Pharaoh and say, okay, we're tired of you, like you change your mind. And if you don't let our people go, the locusts will come. And the locusts will take care of anything that's left that the hail didn't destroy. And the men around Pharaoh are starting to see And they go to Pharaoh and they're like, we're tired of this. How long are you going to let them keep doing this? Can you not see that your Egypt is ruined? And so Pharaoh tries to warn him. Okay, if you can't do your worship here, who all needs to go to worship? And Moses is like, all of us. The men, the women, the children, the livestock, we all need to go. And he's like, no. You leave your women and children and your livestock here, and the men can go. Just the men need to worship, right? I'll let that happen. And Moses says, that's not how it works. It's all of us or nothing. And Pharaoh says, no. And so Moses raises his staff, and the east wind blows in, and this east wind is filled with locusts, upon locusts, upon locusts. So numerous, it says, that the ground looked black, and they ate everything that was left. So there was not an ounce of green left in the fields, on the trees, no fruit, nothing was left. And so Pharaoh, seeing this, and he quickly summoned Aaron and Moses back and said, okay, I messed up. Make them stop. And so Moses raises his staff again, and the west wind blows and blows all the locusts out into the Red Sea. But again, Pharaoh's like, I have my fingers crossed. You're not going anywhere, right? He's like, okay, it works. And then Moses raises his staff towards the sky, and darkness comes over the country. So dark, the word says, that it can be felt. It's like that heavy of the darkness. And it was so dark that no one could see anything. You couldn't see each other, you couldn't see face to face, you couldn't see anything to move about. And it went over the land for 3 days, except for the Israelites. They still had light. And Pharaoh sees this, and he was like, okay, your men, your women, and children, you can all go, but you have to leave your livestock here. And Moses like, again, that's not how it works, Pharaoh. We have to sacrifice. And so we need to take our livestock with us, because we don't know what God requires of us to sacrifice until we get there. And so we all have to go, including our livestock. And Pharaoh's like, nope. Now Pharaoh was living. He's like, I tried to make concessions, I'm a pretty big guy, oh my God, it can't get much worse. And he looks at Moses and he's like, really, I just never want to see your face. Just don't come back, we're done having this back and forth, it's over. I just don't want to see your face, I'm not letting you go, just stay away. But before he goes, Moses gives a warning about what's going to happen. That's where it's like, wow. And sounds like, but Pharaoh was angry because Moses tells him that all of your sworn to death. And then all of your officials are going to come to me and bow down before me, saying, telling us to go and take all your people. Pharaoh's not running anymore. He's done. He's over. So we pick up in Exodus 12. And it says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb with his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people that there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be 1-year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of their door frames of their houses, where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat, roasted over a fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire, with head, legs, and internal organs. Do not eat any of it until morning. If there is some left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it. With your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate for generations to come. You shall celebrate as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day remove the yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the 7th must be cut off from Israel. On the first day hold a sacred assembly, and another on the 7th. Do not work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month you are to eat bread made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast. Wherever you live, you must eat unleavened bread. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your families to slaughter and pass over them. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in a basin, and put some on the top and on both sides of your door frame. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the tops and the sides of your door frame and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, what does the ceremony mean to you, then tell them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes and struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshiped. The Israelites did what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. And at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Up, leave my people, you and all the Israelites. Go and worship the God as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also bless them. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkah, where there were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people were with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough of the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they made loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's provisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites were to keep vigil and honor to honor the Lord for the generations to come. So it did get worse, didn't it? Pharaoh had the worst couple of weeks or months with the Israelites anyone could possibly have. They lost everything. All because Pharaoh would not relent to God and recognize who he was. Because let's think about it. God is God. He is Lord no matter what. No matter if you admit it, no matter if you know it, no matter if you believe it or not, God is God. He is the God of the universe. He is the Lord of all. He is creator, sustainer. He's life giver, provider. He is Lord and God of everything. No matter what we say, no matter if we acknowledge it, no matter if we believe it, He is God. That's why I told Moses last week, remember? He's like, well, what if I go to the Israelites? Who am I supposed to say sent me? And he told Moses to say, I am sent. I am. Because he is Alpha, Omega, beginning and end. There is no one above him. There is no one before him. There is no one beside him. He is God. And no matter if you or your neighbor or friend or family member believes it or not, like Pharaoh, he is still God. Just because someone doesn't believe that God doesn't exist or that God isn't God, that doesn't make it false, right? Because there is absolute truth. The world will tell us that there's not. Society doesn't want there to be absolute truth. They want your truth to be your truth and my truth to be my truth, but that's not how it works with God. God is truth, and there's absolute truth. There are some things that are always wrong. There are some things that are always right. And one thing that is always right and true is that God is God no matter what. Pharaoh would not believe that. And because he did not believe that, he held his land hostage, basically, to the work of God. And they started to see glimmers of it, that his heart was hardened, and he would not see God in and through it all. But God is God, no matter if we acknowledge him or not, he is. And as we come to his table today, and in it we can recognize that God took the firstborn sons of Egypt, but he too gave his only son, so that we all can experience freedom from the slavery of sin. And as we come to the table today, and we think about on that night that Jesus and his disciples sat down to celebrate what? The Passover. They were gathered together in that upper room to remember this night that we just read about in Exodus. Because what did it say? Remember this, do this for generations to come. And so Jesus and his disciples are in the upper room celebrating Passover together. They're remembering that night when death passed over their ancestors' doors marked with the blood of the sacrifice of the Lamb. Not realizing that they were sitting at the table with the Lamb of God, who was getting ready to shed his blood for each of us, the perfect sacrifice. We would no longer have to take that blood and put it on our door frames for death to pass over us, but his blood that he shed for us just needs applied to our hearts and our lives, to wash away our sin, to offer us forgiveness and mercy. Jesus lived that life. He was that spotless lamb. He is why we never have to go and find that lamb again and offer it as a sacrifice, because he did the work for us. He knew he was going to be denied, betrayed by the people he was sharing this meal with. And then he was going to be taken and put on trial by folks that refused to see that he was God, who refused to see that he was the promised Messiah. He was going to be held accountable by people like Pharaoh who could not see who he was. We come today remembering the work that Jesus did so that we may do his work here for the sake of helping others to see God through all he does in us. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the work that you do. And we thank you that we could spend this time in Exodus and look at what you did at the Passover. And how it was that remembrance that your son sat at the table with his mom that night before he would offer himself as the perfect sacrifice. So that all of us can experience freedom from the slavery of sin. Thank you. And as we come today to your table